Hello there and welcome to Mysteries Beneath Earth, where curiosity takes a slow breath and science wanders gently through questions that feel both strange and strangely familiar. Tonight, we are going to stand at the foot of the greatest enigma the ancient world has ever bequeathed to us. We are traveling to the edge of the desert, where the sands of the Sahara meet the fertile green of the Nile Delta, to look up at a structure so massive, so precise, and so enduring that it seems to mock our modern understanding of history. That we are speaking, of course, of the Great Pyramid of Giza. But tonight, I want you to set aside the images you might have seen in textbooks. I want you to forget, just for a moment, the diagrams of burial chambers and the stories of pharaohs preparing for the afterlife. Instead, I want you to imagine standing there in the darkness, the wind whispering off the dunes, pressing your hand against the cold, weathered limestone. If you close your eyes and listen closely, not with your ears, but with your imagination, can you hear a faint hum? What if this mountain of stone was not a tomb at all? What if the silence of the king's chamber was never meant to hold a sarcophagus, but was instead designed to hold a sound? What if the millions of tons of rock, the precise angles, the granite beams shipped from hundreds of miles away, what if all of it was part of a machine? It is a thought that sounds impossible, perhaps even forbidden by the strict timelines of archaeology. Yet, as we will explore tonight, the Great Pyramid contains features that look less like religious symbols and more like engineering blueprints. There are shafts that do not point to stars but seem to carry chemicals. There are chambers made of granite rich in quartz, a material that generates electricity when squeezed. There are acoustic properties so perfect they rival the most advanced concert halls or, perhaps, the most dangerous weapon silos. This is the theory of the Giza power plant. And whether you believe it or not, walking through the evidence forces us to look at the ancient world with new eyes. Let's settle in. Because to understand why a civilization might build a machine out of stone, we first have to grasp the sheer, overwhelming reality of the object itself. The Great Pyramid is the only surviving member of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It stood as the tallest man-made structure on Earth for over 3,800 years, a record only broken when the Lincoln Cathedral was finished in England in the 14th century. But height is just a number. It is the mass that truly boggles the mind. It is estimated to contain 2.3 million blocks of stone, weighing on average 2.5 tons each, with some weighing as much as 80 tons. To put that in perspective, imagine a train of boxcars stretching from New York to Houston. Now fill every single one of them with stone. That is the weight we are dealing with. And we are told that this was built using copper chisels, stone hammers, and hemp ropes by a civilization that had not yet invented the wheel, at least not for heavy transport. But it isn't just the size. It's the precision. The Great Pyramid is aligned to true north with an accuracy of within 3/60ths of a degree. That is more accurate than the Meridian building at the Greenwich Observatory in London. How did a Bronze Age society achieve an alignment that modern engineers struggle to match without lasers and satellites? And then there is the shape. To the naked eye, the pyramid looks like a perfect four-sided triangle. But in 1940, a British Air Force pilot flying over the Giza Plateau captured a photo at a specific time of day, the equinox, that revealed a secret. The sides of the pyramid are actually slightly concave, indented down the center line. This means the Great Pyramid is not four-sided. It is 8-sided. This feature is invisible from the ground and only reveals itself when the sun hits the faces at a precise angle, creating a shadow effect that signals the equinoxes and solstices with the accuracy of a Swiss clock. Why? Why go to the trouble of making an 8-sided pyramid when a 4-sided one is already an impossible challenge? A tomb does not need to track the equinox to a fraction of a degree. A dead king does not care if his monument is aligned to true north better than a modern observatory. These are the questions that have led engineers, rather than archaeologists, to look at the pyramid and see something else. When Christopher Dunn, a master craftsman and engineer with decades of experience in high-precision machining, looked at the diagrams of the Great Pyramid, he didn't see a crypt. He saw a schematic. He saw a machine diagram. He noticed that the interior chambers were devoid of the elaborate art and hieroglyphs found in later tombs. There are no praises to Anubis, no spells from the Book of the Dead inscribed on the walls of the king's chamber. It is stark, industrial, and utilitarian. He noticed that the air shafts, tiny tunnels boring through the mass of the pyramid, were not effective for ventilation and were sealed shut at both ends in the queen's chamber. If they were for the soul of the pharaoh to escape to the stars, why block them? He noticed that the layout of the grand gallery, the horizontal passage, and the subterranean chamber looked remarkably like the components of a massive technical system, perhaps a hydraulic ram pump or a resonator or a chemical reaction chamber. The hypothesis we are exploring tonight suggests that the Great Pyramid was a geomechanical power plant, that it responded to the vibrations of the Earth itself, the heartbeat of the planet, and converted that kinetic energy into electricity, possibly wireless electricity, using the unique properties of the limestone and granite it was built from. It sounds like science fiction. Sounds like the plot of a movie. But as we peel back the layers of geology and physics, we find that the science behind this idea is surprisingly sound. We use the same principles today. We use quartz to run our watches. We use dampeners to protect our skyscrapers. We use acoustic resonance to shatter kidney stones. Is it possible that the ancients knew these principles too, but applied them in a way we have forgotten? Before we dive into the machinery, we have to address the why. Why would they need a power plant? We don't find televisions or blenders in the sands of Egypt. We don't find power lines. But energy is not just for appliances. Energy is for cutting stone. Energy is for plating gold. Energy, in a spiritual society, might be the ultimate proof of connection to the gods. A literal pillar of light or a hum that vibrates through the body during initiation rituals. Or perhaps, as Tesla suggested millennia later, the energy was used to stabilize the planet itself or to communicate across vast distances. Tonight, we are going to treat the Great Pyramid not as a relic, but as a device. We are going to walk through it like engineers performing a safety inspection on a factory that has been shut down for 5,000 years. We will look for the wear and tear. We will test the chemicals on the walls. We will measure the frequencies of the rooms. And we will ask the question, if this machine was turned on today, what would it do? The silence of the stone is heavy tonight. But if you listen closely, it might just be the silence of a battery waiting to be reconnected. If you enjoy exploring these corridors of history, where the light of science meets the shadows of mystery, I would be so grateful if you liked this video and subscribed. It helps this little channel grow and allows us to keep wandering through these forgotten places together. Now, let's look beneath the pyramid. Because every great building needs a foundation, and the foundation of the Giza power plant is not rock, but water. To understand the Great Pyramid as a machine, we cannot look at it in isolation. We have to look at where it sits. Real estate agents often say that the three most important things are location, location, and location. For an engineer building a massive structure, this is even more true. You don't build a hydroelectric dam in a desert, and you don't build a geothermal plant where there is no heat. So why Giza? Why did the builders choose this specific patch of bedrock on the edge of the Western Desert? It wasn't just because it offered a nice view of the Nile. It wasn't just because it was close to the capital city of Memphis. According to the geological surveys of the area, the Giza Plateau is special. It is not just a random hill of sand and stone. It is a specific type of limestone formation, known as the Mokattam Formation, which dates back to the Eocene epoch, some 50 million years ago. But the secret lies deeper. Beneath the plateau, hidden from view, is an immense aquifer. The Nile River, which flows nearby, feeds a vast underground system of water that permeates the porous limestone bedrock. This is crucial. In the context of the energy machine hypothesis, this water is not just a resource. It is the fuel. There is a phenomenon in physics known as piezoelectricity, or sometimes streaming potential. It sounds complex, but the concept is beautifully simple. When water flows through porous rock, like the sponge-like limestone of Giza, it creates a slight electrical charge. The friction of the water molecules rubbing against the stone strips electrons and creates a current. It's not a lightning bolt. It's a subtle, steady field. But when you have millions of gallons of water moving through miles of rock, that energy adds up. Christopher Dunn and other researchers argue that the builders of the pyramid knew this. They didn't just build near the water, they built on top of the water to harness the Earth's natural telluric currents. Telluric currents are electric currents that move underground or through the sea. They are natural phenomena, generated by the Earth's magnetic field and solar activity. But at Giza, the specific geology acts as a lens. The water-saturated limestone creates a conductive path for these currents to flow. Now, look at the pyramid itself. It is built primarily of limestone. But not all limestone is created equal. The core masonry, the millions of blocks that make up the bulk of the pyramid, is a rough, yellow limestone quarried right there on the plateau. This stone is relatively porous and contains impurities like magnesium. But the outer casing stones, the smooth, white, polished stones that once covered the entire pyramid, making it shine like a star, were different. They were Tura limestone, brought from the other side of the Nile. Tura limestone is almost pure calcium carbonate. It is white, dense, and most importantly, it is an electrical insulator. So, picture the structure now. You have a conductive inner core, sitting on top of a water-filled, electrically charged aquifer, and you wrap the whole thing in a seamless, insulating blanket of white Tura limestone. Does that sound familiar? In electronics, this is the basic definition of a capacitor. A capacitor is a device that stores electrical energy. It consists of conductive plates separated by an insulator. The Giza power plant hypothesis suggests that the pyramid was essentially a mountain-sized capacitor, designed to draw energy up from the earth and store it within its mass. The shape itself, pyramidal, might act as a lens to focus this energy upward, concentrating it toward the apex. But a capacitor just sits there holding a charge unless something stimulates it, unless something makes it vibrate. This brings us back to the water. The aquifer beneath Giza isn't a stagnant pool. It is a flowing, dynamic system. And in the past, when the Nile was wild and untamed by the Aswan Dam, the water table would have risen and fallen with the seasons, creating pulses of pressure. Some theorists suggest that the builders carved specific tunnels and chambers beneath the pyramid, the so-called subterranean chamber, to tune this water flow. Mainstream Egyptology calls the subterranean chamber an unfinished mistake. They say the builders started digging a tomb underground, changed their minds, and moved upward. It looks chaotic, with rough-hewn walls and a strange pit in the center. But to an engineer like Dunn, the subterranean chamber doesn't look unfinished. It looks like a hydraulic pulse generator. Imagine water rushing into this chamber from the aquifer. The design of the room, specifically the strange, fin-like ridges cut into the bedrock, could have been designed to create turbulence. When water hits a restriction, it creates a water hammer effect. You might have heard this in your own home plumbing. A loud bang when you turn off a tap too quickly. That is a shockwave. If you design a chamber to create a rhythmic water hammer, you are essentially creating a heartbeat. Asterisk thump, thump, thump. Asterisk this physical vibration would travel up through the limestone bedrock and into the pyramid itself. So now we have a mechanism. The earth provides the electricity through telluric currents and aquifer friction. The subterranean chamber provides the mechanical vibration, the pulse. But what happens when that pulse travels up into the pyramid? What receives it? This is where the genius of the design becomes apparent, because the pyramid is not just a pile of limestone. Inside this limestone mountain, there is a system of chambers built from a completely different material, granite. And not just any granite. Red granite from Aswan, shipped down the Nile from 500 miles away. Why go to that effort? Why bring thousands of tons of granite from the far south when you are standing on a mountain of limestone? Granite is harder to cut. It is harder to move. It is harder to polish. But granite has a property that limestone does not. It is full of quartz crystal. And quartz crystal has a property that is the cornerstone of modern electronics. Piezoelectricity. We will dive deep into the King's Chamber and the secrets of the granite in a later part of our journey. But for now, hold this image in your mind. The Great Pyramid is not a silent tomb resting on the sand. It is a coupled system. It is rooted in the water, drawing energy from the flow, pulsing with the rhythm of a hydraulic pump, and channeling that vibration upward into a crystalline heart. It is a machine that begins not with the capstone, but with the bedrock. But if this was a machine, it had to be built with a level of precision that defies belief. A machine that vibrates millions of tons of stone cannot have loose parts. It cannot be close enough. It has to be perfect. And as we will see next, the precision of the Great Pyramid is the one thing that even the harshest skeptics cannot deny. It is a precision that whispers of a knowledge we have long forgotten. Let's move up from the bedrock and look at the measurements. Because the numbers don't lie, and the numbers are impossible. If the geological foundation of the Giza Plateau acts as the battery, then the Great Pyramid itself serves as the casing, the calibrated housing designed to contain and focus that energy. When we use the word precise, we are referring to tolerances that challenge even modern engineering standards. In the modern world, we rely on laser levels and satellite positioning. But looking back 4,500 years to Egypt's 4th dynasty, we typically expect the telltale signs of manual labor. The slight wavering of a wall, the irregularity of hand-hewn stone, or the drift inherent in using soft copper tools against hard rock. Yet at Giza, the physical reality contradicts these expectations. We find a structure that seems to defy the error margins of the Bronze Age. Let's examine the alignment. The Great Pyramid is oriented to true north, not magnetic north, which shifts, but the celestial pole. According to modern survey data, the pyramid is aligned within 3/60ths of a degree of accuracy. To understand the magnitude of this achievement, Consider that the Meridian building at the Greenwich Observatory in London, the modern standard for the prime meridian, was built millennia later with Victorian technology. Yet the Great Pyramid's original orientation rivals its precision. How a civilization without the magnetic compass or advanced optics achieved this remains a subject of intense debate. While simple stellar sighting methods using a merkit, a notched palm rib, are the standard archaeological explanation, the consistency of the alignment across millions of tons of stone suggests a methodology of extreme rigor. Then there is the matter of location. If you trace the latitude line that runs exactly through the apex structure of the Great Pyramid, the coordinate is 29.9792458 degrees N. The speed of light in a vacuum is defined as 299,792,458 meters per second. The numbers are identical. From a scholarly perspective, this is problematic because the meter is a modern unit of measurement, defined originally in late 18th century France. It is highly unlikely, historically speaking, that ancient Egyptians used the meter. Skeptics rightly categorize this as a coincidence or a result of the pyramid's massive size simply crossing that latitude. However, for proponents of the machine hypothesis, this alignment is interpreted not as chance, but as a geological marker, a deliberate placement indicating a deep, perhaps lost, understanding of planetary physics. But let's move from geography to the stone itself. The Great Pyramid was originally sheathed in 144,000 casing stones of highly polished white Tura limestone. When Sir William Flinders Petrie, a pioneer of systematic methodology in archaeology, examined the remaining casing stones in the 1880s, his findings were startling. He reported that the joints between these 16-ton blocks were so tight that neither a needle nor a piece of paper could be inserted between them. He measured the gap at merely 1/50th of an inch, containing a layer of incredibly strong mortar. Furthermore, the mean variation of the cutting from a straight line was only 0.01 inch over a length of 75 inches. This level of flatness is comparable to modern optical precision work. Petrie himself remarked on the immense difficulty of placing such massive stones in exact contact with such microscopic tolerances. The tool marks add another layer to the mystery. Copper, the primary metal available to the dynastic Egyptians, has a hardness of 3 on the Mohs scale. Limestone is similar, but the interior of the pyramid utilizes Aswan red granite, which has a hardness of 6 to 7, while sand abrasion, using quartz sand as a cutting agent, is the accepted method for cutting granite in antiquity. Petrie's analysis of drill cores found at Giza revealed spiral grooves indicating a feed rate, the speed at which the drill sinks into the stone, of 0.1 inch per revolution. This implies a tremendous amount of pressure. Replicating this feed rate in granite usually requires heavy machinery or, as Christopher Dunn suggests, a method that goes beyond simple abrasion, such as ultrasonic or sonic drilling. While no such tools appear in the archaeological record, the physical marks on the stone invite us to consider that the techniques used were far more sophisticated than typically assumed. Christopher Dunn also analyzed the granite boxes in the Serapeum, massive 100-ton sarcophagi similar to the one in the Great Pyramid. He found surface flatness accurate to within 0.000 ths of an inch. For a tomb, this precision appears excessive. A spiritual monument relies on symbolism, not microscopic flatness. But for a machine, precision is functional. In acoustic or electromagnetic systems, surface irregularities cause signal loss. If the Great Pyramid was designed to act as a resonator, as the hypothesis claims, then this impossible precision would be a strict engineering requirement, not an aesthetic choice. The pyramid also encodes the mathematical constants of pi and phi. The perimeter of the base divided by twice the height equals pi, 3.14159, and the surface area ratios reflect the golden ratio, phi. These relationships suggest that the builders were prioritizing geometric harmony, creating a structure that acted as a mathematical mirror for the planet's own dimensions. It was this functional precision, the idea that the accuracy served a purpose beyond the visual, that laid the groundwork for the theory that the Great Pyramid was more than a silent monument. In the late 1970s, a man named Christopher Dunn visited Egypt. He wasn't an archaeologist. He wasn't a historian. He was a master craftsman, a machinist, and an engineer who had spent his life working in the aerospace industry. He knew what it took to cut metal, to shape hard materials, and to build systems that had to work under extreme pressure. Most tourists stand in the king's chamber and feel a sense of spiritual awe. Dunn stood there and felt a sense of professional recognition. He ran his hand over the granite walls. He checked the flatness of the sarcophagus with precision instruments. He looked at the strange, box-like geometry of the room, and he had an epiphany. This isn't a tomb, he thought. This is a machine. To an archaeologist, a stone box is a coffin. To an engineer, a stone box might be a housing, a containment vessel, or a resonator. To an archaeologist, a shaft pointing to the sky is for a soul to travel. To an engineer, a shaft is a conduit for fluids, wires, or waveguides. Dunn went home and spent the next 2 decades reverse engineering the Great Pyramid. He treated it like a piece of alien technology that had been found abandoned, and his job was to figure out what it did. The result was his groundbreaking book, The Giza Power Plant. The core of Dunn's hypothesis is this. The Great Pyramid was a geomechanical power plant that converted the Earth's natural vibrational energy into microwave electricity. IT sounds complex, but let's break it down into a metaphor. Think of the pyramid like a giant musical instrument, specifically a guitar string. When you pluck a guitar string, you are putting mechanical energy into it. The string vibrates. If you bring a tuning fork near that string that is tuned to the same note, the tuning fork will start to vibrate too, even if you don't touch it. This is called sympathetic resonance. Dunn argues that the Earth is constantly vibrating. It hums with seismic noise, tidal energy, and the movement of magma. This is the pluck. The Great Pyramid, with its specific mass and dimensions, is designed to resonate in harmony with the Earth. It is the tuning fork. It captures that seismic energy and amplifies it. But how do you turn vibration into electricity? This is where the granite comes in. As we mentioned in Part 2, the pyramid is packed with red granite from Aswan, which is 55% silicon dioxide crystal quartz. Quartz is piezoelectric. If you squeeze a quartz crystal, it makes electricity. If you vibrate a quartz crystal, it makes electricity. So, if the pyramid is vibrating in tune with the Earth, the millions of tons of granite inside it are under stress. They are vibrating, and they are generating a massive electrical field. But Dunn went further. He looked at the specific components of the pyramid's interior and assigned them mechanical functions. He looked at the queen's chamber and saw not a room for a queen, who was never buried there, but a chemical reaction chamber. He noticed that the shafts leading into the queen's chamber didn't go to the outside. They stopped inside the masonry. Why? He suggested they were feed lines for chemicals, specifically hydrated zinc and dilute hydrochloric acid, which, when mixed, create hydrogen gas. Hydrogen is the fuel of the universe. It is also an excellent medium for absorbing and emitting energy. He looked at the Grand Gallery, that soaring, cathedral-like hallway with its strange corbelled walls, and he didn't see a procession route. He saw a resonator hall. He hypothesized that the gallery originally held a bank of Helmholtz resonators, devices used to amplify sound, that converted the random vibrations of the earth into a focused, organized sound wave. And finally, he looked at the king's chamber. He saw it as the combustion chamber or the transducer. The focused sound from the Grand Gallery would enter the king's chamber, vibrating the granite walls to a fever pitch. The hydrogen gas filling the room would absorb this acoustic energy. And then the final step, the energy would be released, not as fire, but as electromagnetic radiation, specifically in the microwave range. This is the Maser principle, microwave amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. It is the same physics used in lasers but with microwaves. Dunn suggests that the Great Pyramid was essentially a colossal maser, beaming a column of microwave energy out of the southern shaft or the apex to a satellite or a collection tower to power a civilization that left no wires because they didn't need them. It is a wild theory. It completely contradicts the timeline of history. It suggests that 4,500 years ago, the Egyptians or whoever built the pyramids understood physics at a level that rivals or exceeds our own. But before you dismiss it, you have to look at the evidence that Dunn and others have compiled. The evidence is not in the hieroglyphs, but in the chemistry and the scars left on the stone. Why are the walls of the Queen's chamber covered in a layer of salt? Why are there scorch marks on the ceiling of the Grand Gallery? Why is the coffer in the King's chamber a chocolate-colored granite instead of red, as if it has been altered by immense heat? In the next part of our journey, we are going to descend into the Queen's chamber. We are going to look at the air shafts that aren't air shafts and the robotic exploration that discovered a secret door with copper handles. Handles that look suspiciously like electrodes. The machine has a chemical heart and we are about to open it. We are now deep inside the limestone mountain, in a room that sits at the geometric center of the Great Pyramid. It is a room of shadows, smaller and more intimate than the grand chamber above it. History calls this the Queen's Chamber, a name given to it by early Arab explorers who assumed that the smaller room must be for the pharaoh's wife. But like so much at Giza, the name is a lie. No queen was ever buried here. In fact, no body, no mummy, and no funeral goods have ever been found in this room. When the first explorers entered, they found it empty, stark, and unfinished. The floor is rough and uneven, contrasting sharply with the polished limestone walls. If this is not a tomb, what is it? In the blueprint of the Giza power plant, the Queen's chamber is not a passive room. It is the engine starter. It is the mixing bowl. It is the chemical reaction chamber designed to produce the fuel that drives the entire machine. To understand why, we have to look at the most mysterious features of this room. The shafts. For centuries, no one even knew these shafts existed. The walls of the Queen's chamber looked solid. But in 1872, a British engineer named Wayman Dixon noticed a crack in the wall. Driven by curiosity, he pushed a wire into it and felt empty space. He chiseled through 5 inches of solid limestone and discovered a square tunnel, just 8 inches wide, heading straight up into the dark core of the pyramid. He went to the opposite wall, did the same thing, and found a matching tunnel. This discovery is crucial. These shafts were not open to the room. They were hidden behind a solid wall of stone. This means they were never meant for ventilation. You don't build air shafts and then seal them shut with 5 inches of rock. They were also not meant for the human soul to travel out, because unlike the shafts in the king's chamber, these do not reach the outside of the pyramid. They stop. So, what flows through a hidden pipe that doesn't lead outside? Christopher Dunn suggests these were fluid metering lines. He argues that they were designed to deliver two specific chemical solutions into the chamber. Let's look at the evidence found inside these shafts. When Wayman Dixon opened them, he found three objects: a rough stone ball, a small double hook made of metal, and a piece of cedar wood. The wood was recently rediscovered in a cigar box in a university in Scotland and carbon dated to around 3340 BC, centuries older than the supposed reign of Khufu. But the real shock came in 1993, when a German engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a tiny robot called Up the southern shaft. The robot crawled 200 feet upward, deeper than anyone had seen in 4,000 years. And then, it stopped. It was blocked by a stone door. This wasn't just a rock fall. It was a polished limestone slab with two copper pins protruding from it. Copper handles or copper electrodes? In 2002, another robot, the Pyramid Rover, drilled a hole through this door and inserted a camera. It saw a small empty space and then another door behind it. Why all this security for a shaft the size of a dinner plate? Dunn's hypothesis provides a functional answer. He suggests that these shafts were feed lines for a chemical mixture. One shaft delivered a solution of hydrated zinc. The other delivered a solution of dilute hydrochloric acid. When you mix zinc and hydrochloric acid, a violent chemical reaction occurs. The liquid bubbles and boils, and it releases a gas. That gas is hydrogen. Hydrogen is the lightest element in the universe. It is highly energetic. And crucially for the power plant theory, the hydrogen atom has a resonant frequency of 1.42 gigahertz, the frequency of the universe's background noise. Hydrogen is an incredibly efficient medium for absorbing and transferring electromagnetic energy. If the Queen's chamber was a hydrogen generator, it explains the weird features of the room. It explains the niche, a strange, tunnel-like recess in the wall that looks like a perfect place for a cooling tower or a distillation unit. It explains the salt on the walls. Early explorers noted that the Queen's chamber was encrusted with up to half an inch of salt. Some geologists say this is just salt leaching out of the limestone over time. But the salt was also found in the shafts, and analysis of the limestone in the chamber shows it has a much higher salt content than the surrounding rock. Dunn points out that the byproduct of mixing zinc and hydrochloric acid is zinc chloride, a salt. If this reaction was running for years or decades, the walls would be coated in it. It also explains the air shafts being sealed. If you are generating hydrogen gas, you need a pressurized seal. You don't want the gas leaking out until you are ready to use it. The 5 inches of stone were a safety seal, perhaps designed to be broken or porous enough to allow the liquid in under pressure but keep the gas contained. And those copper pins in the Gantenbrink door. Copper is a conductor. In a chemical system, they could be sensors to detect the level of the liquid or electrodes to facilitate the reaction. So, picture the machine in operation. Fluids flow down from hidden reservoirs high in the pyramid through the air shafts and inject into the Queen's chamber. They mix in the center, boiling and churning. The chamber fills with pure hydrogen gas. Since hydrogen is lighter than air, it rises. It needs a way out. It needs to go up to the next stage of the machine. And directly above the Queen's chamber, waiting to receive this gas, is the most acoustically complex room ever built in the ancient world. The Grand Gallery. We are leaving the chemical mixing bowl now. We are following the gas upward, into the dark, soaring cathedral of stone where the sound of the earth is about to be amplified into a weapon of power. We leave the Queen's chamber and step into the ascending passage. Suddenly, the cramped tunnel opens up, and we find ourselves in a space that takes the breath away. This is the Grand Gallery. It is a hall of immense proportions, 153 feet long and 28 feet high. But it is the shape that makes it feel alien. The walls are not vertical. They are corbelled. This means each layer of stone overlaps the one below it by about 3 inches, stepping inward as they go up, until they meet at a narrow ceiling. It looks like an inverted staircase, or the inside of a stepped pyramid. To an architect, this is a clever way to bear the weight of the mountain above. But to an acoustic engineer, this shape serves a very different purpose. It minimizes acoustic reflection. It stops sound waves from bouncing back and forth chaotically, echo, and instead directs them. If the Queen's chamber is the fuel injector, the Grand Gallery is the resonator. In the Giza power plant theory, the purpose of this massive hall is to collect the vibration coming from the Earth, the seismic pulse we discussed in Part 2, and convert it into airborne sound. But there is a missing piece of the puzzle. When we look at the Grand Gallery today, it looks empty. It is just a long stone ramp. However, along the sides of the ramp, there are 27 pairs of slots cut into the stone. These slots, or mortises, are evenly spaced. Some of them are vertical, some are horizontal. Egyptologists have suggested they were used to hold wooden beams that held back the plugging stones during construction. But the design is far too complex for a simple retaining wall. The slots are cut with precision, and they are arranged in a way that suggests they held something permanent. Christopher Dunn proposes that these slots held resonators. Imagine a rack of 27 massive objects, perhaps made of metal or crystal, standing like ribs along the length of the gallery. Dunn calls them Helmholtz resonators. A Helmholtz resonator is a device that resonates at a specific frequency. You have used one before. If you have ever blown across the top of an empty bottle to make a hoo sound, you have used a Helmholtz resonator. The air inside the bottle bounces at a specific pitch determined by the volume of the bottle and the size of the opening. Dunn suggests that the 27 racks in the Grand Gallery were tuned to different harmonic frequencies of the Earth. As the vibration from the subterranean chamber traveled up through the limestone, these resonators would begin to vibrate. They would pick up the mechanical energy and convert it into sound. Because there were 27 of them, they could capture a broad spectrum of vibration, like a choir singing a complex chord. The result would be a focused, incredibly powerful beam of sound traveling up the gallery, directed by the corbelled walls toward the top of the ramp. And what is at the top of the ramp? The King's Chamber. There is physical evidence that something violent happened in this gallery. When the first modern explorers cleared the debris from the Grand Gallery, they found that the limestone walls were scorched. Sir William Flinders Petrie described the stones as having been subjected to intense heat, causing the limestone to calcify and flake off. Some of the stones near the top of the gallery are cracked and damaged in ways that suggest an explosion or a massive pressure wave. If this was a tomb, why are there scorch marks on the ceiling? You don't light a bonfire in a hallway leading to a royal burial. But if this was a machine filled with hydrogen gas and high-energy acoustics, then a malfunction could be catastrophic. A spark, a pressure spike, a misalignment could have caused an explosion that blew out the resonator banks and scorched the walls. There is another detail in the Grand Gallery that points to engineering. The Great Step. At the very top of the gallery, just before the entrance to the King's Chamber, there is a massive block of stone that forms a step about 35 inches high. It seems out of place. Why force a funeral procession to hoist a sarcophagus over a 3-foot hurdle right at the end of the journey? In the context of wave mechanics, this step makes perfect sense. It acts as an impedance matching device. When a wave travels from one medium to another, or from a large space to a small space, it can lose energy, can reflect back. To prevent this, you need a transition zone that allows the wave to flow smoothly. In electronics, we use impedance matching transformers. In acoustics, we use shapes that compress the wave. The great step, combined with the antechamber, a small room with sliding granite slabs, acts as an acoustic filter. It ensures that only the pure, focused sound frequency enters the king's chamber. So, we have the hydrogen gas rising from the queen's chamber. We have the acoustic energy focused by the grand gallery. Both are now converging on the final stage of the machine. They are heading for the red granite room, the room where the sarcophagus sits, the room that is not a burial chamber, but a transducer designed to rip electrons from the fabric of the stone itself. We are about to enter the king's chamber, and this is where the magic or the physics truly happens. Because the granite in that room is not just a wall. It is alive with voltage. We have followed the path of the water vibrating in the bedrock. We have traced the chemicals flowing into the queen's chamber to be born as hydrogen gas. We have watched that gas rise into the soaring resonator of the grand gallery, where the Earth's pulse is converted into a focused beam of sound. Now, all of these elements, vibration, gas, and sound, converge in one final, red granite room. The king's chamber. If the Great Pyramid is a machine, this is the engine block. This is where the power is generated. When you enter the king's chamber, the first thing you notice is the change in atmosphere. The air feels different here, heavy, static, and dense. The walls are no longer the soft, yellow limestone of the core or the white limestone of the casing. They are made of massive blocks of red granite, brought from the quarries of Aswan, 500 miles to the south. There are 100 of these blocks, arranged in 5 rows. Some weigh as much as 70 tons. They are fitted together with such precision that you cannot see the joints until you are inches away. The floor is floating, resting not on the pyramid's core but on granite beams that isolate it from the surrounding masonry. Why granite? Why go to the immense trouble of shipping 70-ton stones down the Nile, dragging them across the desert, and hoisting them 150 feet into the air? A tomb does not require granite. Limestone is easier to work with and just as beautiful when polished. The answer lies in the crystal structure of the stone itself. Red granite contains a high concentration of quartz silicon dioxide. About 55% of the rock is crystal. Quartz has a unique property called piezoelectricity. The word comes from the Greek piezein, which means to squeeze or press. If you take a piece of quartz and squeeze it or stretch it or vibrate it, it generates an electrical charge. The mechanical stress forces the ions in the crystal lattice to move, creating a voltage potential across the surface. This is not fringe science. It is the basis of modern electronics. Quartz watches work on this principle. Microphones, sonar, and cigarette lighters use it.in the Giza power plant hypothesis. The king's chamber is a massive piezoelectric generator. Imagine the machine running. The acoustic energy from the grand gallery hits the granite walls. The sound waves are powerful, tuned to the resonant frequency of the room. They slam into the granite, causing the quartz crystals inside to vibrate. Millions of tons of rock begin to sing. As they vibrate, they are stressed and relaxed thousands of times per second. This creates a massive electrical field. The granite walls become alive with voltage. But there is a problem. Granite is heavy. If you stack millions of tons of limestone on top of a hollow granite room, the pressure could crush it, or worse, it could dampen the vibrations, preventing the piezoelectric effect from working. You need the room to be able to ring like a bell, not be stifled by the weight of the mountain. This brings us to one of the most controversial features of the Great Pyramid. The relieving chambers. Above the flat ceiling of the king's chamber, there are 5 hidden compartments stacked on top of each other like layers of a cake. They are separated by massive granite beams, monoliths weighing up to 70 tons each. The top layer is covered by a gabled limestone roof. Egyptologists call these relieving chambers because they believe they were designed to relieve the weight of the pyramid from the ceiling of the king's chamber to prevent it from collapsing. But structural engineers have pointed out a flaw in this explanation. The gabled roof at the very top is perfectly capable of diverting the weight on its own. The 4 layers of flat granite beams below it add nothing to the structural integrity. In fact, they add more weight to the ceiling. If the goal was simply to keep the room from collapsing, one gabled roof would have been enough. So, why build 5 separate, hollow chambers with massive granite floors? Christopher Dunn suggests they are not for weight relief at all. He calls them tuning forks. Notice the details. The tops of these granite beams are rough and uneven, looking almost like a mountain range. But the bottoms, the sides facing down into the chamber, are perfectly flat and polished. Dunn argues that the builders tuned these beams. By leaving the top rough, they could chip away stone to alter the mass until the beam resonated at a precise frequency. When the sound from the grand gallery hits these beams, they vibrate in sympathy. Because they are freestanding, held only at the ends, they can ring freely. This creates a feedback loop. The sound enters, the beams vibrate, the granite generates electricity, and the energy is amplified in the hollow spaces above the chamber. And then there is the sarcophagus. It sits alone in the room, a box made of chocolate-colored granite. It has no lid. It has no inscription. It is too large to have been brought through the door, meaning the pyramid must have been built around it. When you strike the side of this coffer, it rings like a bell. It is extremely resonant. Dunn suggests this was not a coffin, but a key component of the machine, perhaps a containment vessel for a radioactive source or a specific chemical that acted as a catalyst for the hydrogen reaction filling the room. The hydrogen gas we discussed earlier would now be filling this chamber. Hydrogen absorbs electromagnetic energy. As the granite walls pump out electrical fields, the hydrogen atoms would absorb that energy, becoming excited. This is the principle of a maser, microwave amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. In a laser, you excite atoms until they release photons of light. In a maser, you excite them until they release microwaves. The king's chamber in this view is the cavity of the maser. The granite provides the energy. The hydrogen provides the medium. The result is a focused beam of microwave radiation, collected and directed out of the southern shaft, the shaft that points toward the belt of Orion. But there is physical evidence that something went wrong here, too. When Sir William Flinders Petrie examined the king's chamber, he noticed that the massive granite beams in the ceiling were cracked. They had snapped, as if subjected to an immense upward pressure. Earthquakes don't usually snap beams in that specific way without collapsing the rest of the structure. And the settling of the pyramid should have pressed down, not pushed up. Dunn proposes that the cracks are evidence of the same catastrophe that scorched the Grand Gallery. A malfunction caused a runaway reaction. The hydrogen ignited or the vibration became too intense. The pressure wave pushed outward and upward, snapping the 70-ton beams like matchsticks and permanently shutting down the power plant. When we stand in the King's Chamber today, we are standing in the burnt-out hull of a generator. The granite is silent. The hydrogen is gone. But the cracks in the ceiling remain, a testament to a force that was once powerful enough to break the bones of the earth. But for this machine to work, it couldn't just make noise. It had to make a specific noise. It had to sing in a key that the earth itself would recognize. In the next section, we will listen to the sound of the pyramid. We will look at modern acoustic experiments that found the King's Chamber resonates at a frequency that musicians know well, a chord that might be the secret password to planetary energy. We often think of architecture as visual. We admire the lines, the shadows, the scale. But the Great Pyramid was built for the ear as much as for the eye. It is an acoustic instrument of unparalleled sophistication. If you have ever stood in a cathedral and hummed a low note, you know the feeling. The air seems to thicken. The sound vibrates in your chest. The building talks back to you. In the Great Pyramid, this effect is amplified to a terrifying degree. In the late 1990s, an acoustic engineer named Tom Danley conducted a series of experiments inside the Great Pyramid. Danley is not a fringe theorist. He is a respected professional who designs sound systems for major stadiums and the military. He knows sound. He brought massive amplifiers and subwoofers into the King's Chamber to test its resonant frequency. He wanted to see how the room responded to different pitches. What he found was astonishing. He discovered that the King's Chamber, the sarcophagus, and the relieving chambers above all resonate at a specific set of frequencies. When he played these frequencies, the effect was physical. The dust on the floor began to dance. The walls seemed to breathe. He reported that the feeling was overwhelming, creating a sense of anxiety and pressure in the body. The primary resonant frequency of the King's Chamber was measured at roughly 438 Hz. To a musician, this is the note F-sharp, specifically a slightly detuned F-sharp, if we use the modern A equals 440 Hz standard. But it gets stranger. The sarcophagus also resonates at a frequency related to F-sharp. And ancient Egyptian flutes found in museums have been discovered to be tuned to, you guessed it, F-sharp. Why F-sharp? Some researchers claim that this frequency is harmonically related to the resonant frequency of the Earth itself. We often hear about the Schumann resonance, which is the electromagnetic heartbeat of the Earth's atmosphere, vibrating at 7.83 Hz. While 7.83 Hz is an electromagnetic frequency, not a sound wave, the concept of Earth resonance is crucial to the Giza power plant theory. The idea is that the pyramid is a coupled oscillator. Think of two pendulums swinging side by side. If you connect them with a string, they will eventually sync up and swing together. The Earth is the big pendulum. The pyramid is the small pendulum. By tuning the pyramid to a harmonic of the Earth's vibration, the builders ensured that the energy would flow efficiently from the ground into the structure. If the pyramid were tuned to a dissonant note, say, a C-sharp when the Earth is singing in F-sharp, the energy would be blocked. It would clash. But by tuning it to the same chord, the pyramid becomes transparent to the energy. It allows the seismic pulse to build and build, establishing a standing wave. A standing wave is a wave that remains in a constant position. In a river, it's the wave that stays in one place over a rock while the water flows through it. In acoustics, it's a wave that fits perfectly inside a room, bouncing back and forth so that the peaks and troughs align. This creates zones of immense high energy and zones of silence. Dunn suggests that the dimensions of the king's chamber were calculated specifically to house the standing wave. The length, width, and height are not random. They are wavelengths. When the machine was active, the sound in the king's chamber wouldn't just be loud. It would be a physical force. It would be loud enough to crush bone, loud enough to heat the air, loud enough to squeeze the quartz crystals in the granite until they discharged their voltage. This acoustic design extends to the exterior as well. The Great Pyramid's dimensions are a scale model of the Earth. If you take the height of the pyramid and multiply it by 43,200, you get the polar radius of the Earth. If you take the base perimeter and multiply it by 43,200, you get the equatorial circumference of the Earth. Why 43,200? It is a number derived from the precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis that takes 25,920 years to complete a full circle. 43,200 is a multiple of the number 72, which is the heartbeat of precession. The Earth's axis moves 1 degree every 72 years. This suggests that the builders didn't just pick a random size. They tuned the pyramid to the planet's geometry and its movement through time. By scaling the pyramid to the Earth, they ensured that it would resonate with the Earth. It is like making a small radio antenna that is a specific fraction of the wavelength of the radio station you want to catch. The Great Pyramid is a planetary antenna. But an antenna is useless if it doesn't broadcast. We have the energy, the piezoelectric charge. We have the carrier wave, the microwave beam generated by the hydrogen maser. Where does it go? The pyramid today is flat-topped. The capstone, the Benben stone, is missing. Legend says it was made of gold or electrum, a mix of gold and silver. In the power plant theory, the capstone was not just a decoration. It was the output terminal. It was the lens that focused the energy into a coherent beam and shot it into the sky. Some theorists suggest it ionized the atmosphere, creating a conductive channel to the ionosphere, essentially plugging the pyramid into the global atmospheric circuit. Others, like Dunn, suggested beamed energy to a satellite or a receiver tower. In the next section, we will look at that missing piece. We will climb to the summit, where the gold once shone, and ask, what happened to the tip of the machine? And could the Eye of Horus be a memory of the blinding light that once sat atop the plateau? The sound of the Earth is humming in the chamber. The voltage is rising. We are ready for transmission. If you are enjoying this deep dive into the acoustic shadows of the past, please take a moment to subscribe. It helps us keep the signal strong. Now, let's look up to the missing point where the Earth met the sky. We have now constructed the machine in our minds. We have the aquifer pulsing beneath the bedrock, providing the heartbeat. We have the chemicals mixing in the Queen's chamber, creating the hydrogen fuel. We have the Grand Gallery amplifying the Earth's vibration into a focused acoustic beam. And we have the King's chamber, the granite heart, converting that sound into a massive electrical charge within a hydrogen atmosphere. But a machine that generates power is useless if that power has nowhere to go. Energy must flow. If it is trapped, it becomes a bomb. If it is released, it becomes a resource. So where did the energy go? To answer this, we must look to the very top of the Great Pyramid. Today, if you look at photos of the summit, you will see a flat, jagged plateau of stone. There is a wooden pole stuck in the middle to show the original height, about 30 feet higher than the current stones. The top is missing. In ancient times, the pyramid was crowned with a capstone, or pyramid ion. While the casing stones were white limestone, Legends and historical accounts suggest the capstone was different. It was said to be made of gold, or more likely electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver that in the context of a tomb. A gold capstone is a symbol of the sun, a shining beacon of the pharaoh's divinity. But in the context of electrical engineering, gold is something else entirely. It is one of the best conductors of electricity in existence. It does not corrode. It does not tarnish. It remains a perfect interface for energy forever. The Giza power plant hypothesis proposes that the capstone was not just a decoration. It was the output terminal. It was the antenna. Let's trace the path of the energy one last time. The piezoelectric effect in the king's chamber generates a massive electromagnetic field. The hydrogen gas absorbs this energy, oscillating at microwave frequencies. This energy needs a guide. The entire shape of the pyramid acts as a lens. The concave sides, the 8-sided geometry we discussed earlier, help to focus waves toward the center. The internal shafts, specifically the southern shaft of the king's chamber, point upward. Christopher Dunn suggests that the energy was guided up through the masonry to the apex. The gold capstone, connected to this power source, would become electrically charged to an immense voltage. But here is where the physics gets truly spectacular. When you build up a high enough voltage on a sharp point, like the tip of a pyramid, you create a phenomenon known as corona discharge. The air around the tip becomes ionized. The molecules of nitrogen and oxygen are stripped of their electrons, turning the air into a plasma. Plasma is conductive. Normally, air is an insulator. Electricity cannot flow through it easily, which is why lightning has to build up millions of volts before it strikes. But if you ionize the air, you create a conductive pathway, a wire made of glowing gas, reaching up into the sky. If the voltage was high enough, the Great Pyramid would have had a visible beam of light erupting from its tip, a glowing violet-blue pillar of plasma stretching upward into the atmosphere. This image, the pillar of light, resonates deeply with ancient Egyptian mythology. They spoke of the Benben stone, the primordial mound that rose from the waters of chaos, which was associated with the sun god Ra and the beam of light. They often depicted the sun as a disk with rays stretching down to the earth. Could these myths be distorted memories of the machine in operation? Could the Eye of Ra be a description of the glowing apex of the power plant? But what was the point of ionizing the air? Why shoot a beam of plasma into the sky? There are two main theories within the power plant hypothesis. The first is the satellite theory. Dunn suggests that the microwave energy was beamed to a satellite in geostationary orbit. This satellite would then reflect the energy back down to receivers all over the planet, providing wireless power to a global civilization. It sounds like science fiction, but we use similar concepts today with communication satellites. The second theory is the atmospheric coupling theory. This suggests that the beam was used to create a conductive channel to the ionosphere. The ionosphere is a layer of the Earth's atmosphere, starting about 37 miles up, that is full of charged particles. The Earth's surface is also charged. Between them, the atmosphere acts as an insulator. We live inside a giant planetary capacitor. If the Great Pyramid created a conductive path to the ionosphere, it would essentially be plugging in to the Earth's atmospheric circuit. Could draw energy down or pump energy up, modulating the global electrical field. This might have been used for weather control. Ionizing the atmosphere can influence cloud formation and rainfall. In a desert region that relies on the Nile, the ability to bring rain or control storms would be more valuable than gold. Or It could have been a broadcast system, a way to send information or power through the Earth ionosphere waveguide. There is a fascinating detail about the capstone that supports the idea of it being an active device. In many obelisks, which are essentially miniature pyramid towers, the top is covered in electrum. But the stone beneath the electrum is often granite, not limestone. Granite, as we know, contains quartz. Quartz is a dielectric, an insulator that can hold an electric field. That if the Great Pyramid had a granite core near the top, and there are granite blocks found near the summit, and a gold capstone and a limestone body, you have the perfect recipe for a high-voltage discharge tip. But where is the capstone now? It is gone. Some say it was stolen. Some say it was never finished. But if the machine suffered a catastrophic failure, an explosion in the Grand Gallery and the King's Chamber, the capstone might have been the first thing to go. A massive surge of energy could have vaporized it or blown it off the top of the pyramid. There are curious accounts from history. The Roman historian Pliny the Elder mentioned that the obelisks were dedicated to the sun god because they caught the rays. But he also mentioned a legend that the king who erected one was so afraid of the evil eye that he bound his own son to the apex to ensure the workmen were careful. It's a grim story. But in the language of myth, the evil eye often refers to dangerous energy. Was the apex of the pyramid known to be a place of death? A place where the air crackled and the hair on your arms stood up? We also have the report of Sir William Siemens, a British inventor. In the late 19th century, he climbed to the top of the Great Pyramid. The air was dry, and the desert wind was blowing. When he raised his hand, he heard a sharp ringing noise. He felt a prickling sensation. He took a sip from a wine bottle he had brought with him, and as his lips touched the glass, he received a violent electric shock. The pyramid was acting like a giant Leyden jar, a primitive capacitor. Even in its ruined state, Siemens was an engineer. He wrapped a wet newspaper around the bottle to create a conductive outer layer, essentially turning the bottle into a makeshift capacitor. When he held it up, it became charged with electricity from the air. Sparks flew from the bottle. The Arab guides were terrified, thinking he was practicing witchcraft, and tried to throw him off the pyramid. This happened thousands of years after the machine was shut down. The gold capstone was gone. The chemicals were gone. The granite beams were cracked. And yet, the shape alone, the sheer mass and geometry of the limestone mountain, was still interacting with the electrical field of the desert. Imagine what it did when it was whole. Imagine when the white casing stones were smooth and polished, insulating the core. Imagine when the gold capstone was in place. Imagine when the pulse of the Nile was driving the heartbeat. The output would have been blinding, a star on Earth. But this idea of wireless power, of using the earth and the sky as a circuit, didn't die with the Egyptians. Thousands of years later, a man in New York would propose exactly the same thing. He built a tower on Long Island that looked nothing like a pyramid, but worked on the same principles. His name was Nikola Tesla, and his connection to Giza is closer than you might think. In the early 20th century, the world was rushing to string copper wires across every continent. The telegraph, the telephone, the electric grid, all of them depended on physical cables to carry power from one place to another. But one man thought this was primitive. He believed that the earth itself was the wire. Nikola Tesla is often called the man who invented the 20th century. He gave us alternating current, AC, the induction motor, radio, and the neon light. But his greatest ambition was a project that failed: the Wardenclyffe Tower. Built on Long Island, New York, The Wardenclyffe Tower was a massive wooden structure topped with a giant copper dome. Tesla claimed that with this tower, he could transmit electricity wirelessly to any point on the globe. He wasn't talking about charging a toothbrush across a room. He was talking about lighting up Paris from a power plant in Niagara Falls, with no wires in between. How? By using the Earth. Tesla discovered that the Earth is not just a rock. It is a conductor, and more importantly, it is a resonant body. Just like a wine glass will shatter if you sing the right note, the Earth will ring electrically if you hit it with the right frequency. Tesla calculated that if he pumped an electrical current into the ground at a specific rhythm, the wave would travel through the Earth, bounce off the other side of the planet, and come back, reinforcing itself. He called this a standing wave. If this sounds familiar, it is because we just used the exact same language to describe the acoustics of the Great Pyramid. The parallels between Tesla's Wardenclyffe Tower and the Great Pyramid of Giza are so striking that many researchers believe Tesla was, knowingly or unknowingly, replicating the ancient machine. Let's look at the design. Tesla's tower needed a deep connection to the ground. He didn't just build a foundation. He dug a shaft 120 feet deep beneath the tower. At the bottom of this shaft, he installed iron pipes that were driven another 300 feet into the earth, into the aquifer. Tesla explicitly stated that he needed a grip on the earth so that he could shake it electrically. He needed the groundwater. The Great Pyramid sits on top of a natural aquifer. The builders carved the subterranean chamber deep into the bedrock, reaching down toward the water table. Just like Tesla, they needed a connection to the Earth's fluids to drive the resonance. Tesla's tower was topped with a capacitive dome, a mushroom-shaped terminal covered in copper plates. This dome was designed to accumulate a massive electrostatic charge, just like the gold capstone of the pyramid. Tesla used a high-voltage transformer, the Tesla coil, to step up the voltage until it could break down the air and create a channel to the ionosphere. The King's Chamber, with its stacked granite beams and piezoelectric generation, served the function of the step-up transformer. But the most chilling connection is the numbers. Tesla was obsessed with the numbers 3, 6, and 9. He famously said, "If you only knew the magnificence of the 3, 6, and 9, then you would have a key to the universe." The Great Pyramid is a monument to these numbers. The 3 pyramids of Giza, the triangle, 3 sides, the hexagon of the honeycomb structure of granite crystals, 6, the 9 gods of the Ennead in Egyptian mythology. But more physically, the location of the Great Pyramid involves these numbers. The speed of light coordinate 29.9792458 adds up to, well, that's numerology and we want to stick to physics. But the ratios of the pyramid, the relationship between pi and phi, are fundamentally about the geometry of waves. Tesla believed he had discovered a fundamental law of nature, that energy could be transported without loss if you engaged the medium itself, the earth. He believed that the ancients might have known this. In one of his articles, Tesla wrote about his belief that past civilizations had achieved wonders that we had forgotten. He was fascinated by the idea that electricity was not invented, but rediscovered. So was Wardenclyffe a modern pyramid? The tragic irony is that we will never know for sure if Tesla's tower would have worked. His financier, J.P. Morgan, pulled the funding when he realized that wireless power couldn't be metered. If anyone could stick an antenna in the ground and get free electricity, how would you charge them for it? The tower was demolished in 1917 for scrap metal. But the Great Pyramid was not demolished. It survived. And its scrap metal, the gold capstone, the metal fittings in the gallery, the doors, was stripped away long ago. However, the wreckage tells a story. Tesla's lab in Colorado Springs, where he tested these theories, was a place of dangerous electrical storms. He created artificial lightning that blew out the dynamo at the local power plant. He created thunder that was heard 15 miles away. If the Great Pyramid was a machine operating on the same scale, a machine putting out gigawatts of power, then a malfunction wouldn't just blow a fuse. It would be like a bomb going off inside a mountain. This brings us to the evidence of catastrophe. We have talked about the scorch marks in the Grand Gallery. We have talked to the cracked beams in the King's Chamber. But there is more. There are rocks on the Giza Plateau that have been vitrified, melted into glass by intense heat. There is the chemical residue that shouldn't be there. In the next part of our documentary, we are going to look at the crime scene. We are going to investigate the meltdown of the Giza power plant. What happens when a hydrogen maser goes critical? What happens when the earth shakes too hard? The machine stopped 4,500 years ago, but the scars it left behind are still fresh if you know where to look. And they suggest that the silence of the pyramid is not a peaceful sleep, but the silence of a wreck after the crash. We have spent tonight building a machine in our minds, a machine of water, stone, sound, and chemistry, a machine designed to sing with the earth and harvest its energy. But if you go to Giza today, the machine is silent. The water is gone. The chemicals have dried up. The capstone is missing. If this was a power plant, why did it stop? Did the builders simply turn it off and leave? Or did something go terribly, violently wrong? In the world of engineering, when a system fails, it leaves clues. A blown fuse leaves a burn mark. A ruptured pipe leaves water damage. A boiler explosion leaves twisted metal. The Great Pyramid is full of such clues, but for centuries, we have looked at them as the ravages of time or the clumsiness of tomb robbers. When we look at them through the lens of the Giza power plant hypothesis, however, they transform into the forensic evidence of a catastrophic failure. Let's return to the Grand Gallery. As we discussed, this soaring hall is theorized to be the resonator, the place where sound was focused toward the King's Chamber. When Sir William Flinders Petrie first documented the condition of the gallery in the 1880s, he noted something strange about the limestone walls. He wrote that the stone appeared to be burnt. The limestone in the Grand Gallery is not smooth like the limestone in other parts of the pyramid. It is exfoliated. This means the surface has flaked off, peeling away in layers. In geology, this happens when stone is subjected to intense, rapid heating. The moisture inside the rock expands, turning to steam, and pops the surface of the stone off. Petrie estimated that some of the damage suggested temperatures of hundreds of degrees. Mainstream Egyptologists suggest this might be from torches used by explorers over the centuries. But torches leave soot. They don't generate enough radiant heat to exfoliate massive limestone blocks deep into the masonry. Christopher Dunn suggests a different culprit. Hydrogen fired if the resonator banks in the Grand Gallery were vibrating at high energy, and if the hydrogen seal from the Queen's Chamber failed, the gallery could have filled with hydrogen gas. Hydrogen is incredibly flammable. A single spark, perhaps from the friction of the vibrating stones themselves, could have ignited the gas. But it wouldn't just be a fire. It would be a deflagration, a subsonic combustion wave that creates immense heat and pressure. The explosion would have scorched the walls, calcining the limestone and stripping away its surface. It would have blown out the resonator racks, the missing 27 devices we discussed, leaving only the empty slots in the ramps. This explosion would have sent a shockwave straight up into the King's Chamber. And that is where we find the smoking gun of the catastrophe. Look up at the ceiling of the king's chamber. As we mentioned before, the 9 massive granite beams that form the roof are all cracked. These beams weigh 70 tons each. They are some of the strongest stones in the world, and yet they are snapped. The cracks are not near the supports where you would expect them if the weight of the pyramid was crushing them down. The cracks are on the underside, and in some cases, the beams are displaced upwards. Dunn's analysis suggests that the force that broke these beams came from inside the chamber, pushing out. Imagine the moment of failure. The machine is running. The room is filled with hydrogen plasma. The walls are pulsing with piezoelectric electricity. Suddenly, the acoustic governor fails. The vibration creates a runaway feedback loop. Or perhaps the hydrogen ignites. A massive pressure wave hits the room. The granite walls hold, but the ceiling, the weakest point, buckles. The 70-ton beams snap upward, lifting the millions of tons of masonry above them just a fraction of an inch, enough to vent the pressure but ruining the machine forever. The builders, or perhaps later restorers, noticed this damage. There is evidence that someone in antiquity tried to patch these cracks with plaster. They didn't try to replace the beams. That would be impossible without dismantling the pyramid, so they just hid the damage. Then there is the sarcophagus, or the coffer. If this was a precision container for a radioactive or chemical catalyst, it was the heart of the reaction. Today, the coffer is a dark, chocolate brown color, but it is made of Aswan granite, which is naturally red/pink. Why is it dark? Dunn notes that the coffer shows signs of thermal discoloration. It looks like granite that has been cooked. Even more intriguingly, there is a section of the coffer that has been broken off. The break is not a clean shatter. It looks rough, almost melted. There are no tools found in ancient Egypt that could inflict that kind of damage on a granite box. But a thermal shock, a sudden spike in temperature followed by a cooling, could shatter the stone structure. And finally, we have the melted rocks of the plateau. Outside the pyramid, near the base, explorers have found fragments of diorite and granite that appear to be vitrified, turned into glass. Vitrification only happens at extreme temperatures, often exceeding 1,100 degrees Celsius. You don't get vitrification from a campfire. You get it from lightning strikes, atomic blasts, or a high-energy discharge from a malfunctioning power plant. If the capstone was indeed an electrical terminal, a surge of power during the meltdown could have caused an arc flash, a bolt of lightning that struck the plateau, melting the rocks where it hit. The picture of the tomb changes dramatically. We are not walking through a silent monument to a dead king. We are walking through the ruins of a Chernobyl-like event in the ancient world. The scorch marks, the exfoliated stone, the snapped beams, the cooked granite, all of it points to a system that was overloaded. Perhaps this explains why the pyramid was abandoned, why there are no hieroglyphs inside, why the later Egyptians treated Giza with such superstition. If the machine exploded, it would have been terrifying. The ground would have shaken. A pillar of fire might have erupted from the summit. The hum that had sustained the land would have turned into a scream, and then silence. The knowledge of how to fix it might have died with the engineers who were running it. Or perhaps the civilization decided that the power was too dangerous to use again. They sealed the doors. They stripped the casing stones. They let the sand cover the evidence. But the pyramid is not just a ruin. It still has secrets. And in 2017, a team of scientists using cosmic rays proved that we haven't even found all the rooms yet. Could the missing components of the machine be hiding in the big void? Let's fast forward from the ancient catastrophe to 21st century technology. because the next piece of evidence didn't come from a shovel, it came from subatomic particles raining down from the stars. For over a century, we thought we knew the map of the Great Pyramid. We thought we had found every chamber. The kings, the queens, the subterranean. We thought the rest was just solid masonry. But in 2015, a project was launched that would change everything. It was called the Scan Pyramids Project. It was a collaboration between Egyptian authorities, Japanese scientists, and French engineers. Their goal was to look inside the pyramid without drilling a single hole. To do this, they used muons. Muons are elementary particles, similar to electrons but much heavier. They are created constantly in the upper atmosphere when cosmic rays from deep space collide with air molecules. They rain down on us all the time, passing through our bodies and our buildings. But unlike light or X-rays, muons can pass through hundreds of meters of stone. However, stone does absorb some of them. By placing muon detectors inside and around the pyramid, scientists could measure the density of the structure. If more muons came through a certain area, it meant there was less stone there. It meant there was a hole. In 2017, the team announced a discovery that shook the world. They found a massive, previously unknown cavity deep inside the Great Pyramid. They named it the Big Void. This isn't a small crack. The Big Void is at least 30 meters, 98 feet, long. It is situated directly above the Grand Gallery, and it has a similar cross-section. It is huge. It is roughly the size of a 200-seat airplane. And it has been sealed since the pyramid was built 4,500 years ago. No human has entered it. No tomb robber has plundered it. What is it? Mainstream Egyptologists immediately tried to downplay the discovery. They suggested it was a relieving space, a gap left by the builders to reduce the weight on the Grand Gallery. But from an engineering standpoint, this makes little sense. The Grand Gallery is corbelled. It is incredibly strong. It doesn't need a relieving chamber above it. Furthermore, the void is too high up to effectively relieve weight from the gallery roof. And why make a relieving space that is 30 meters long and shaped like a hall? In the context of the Giza power plant, the Big Void is not a construction gap. It is a missing component. Christopher Dunn and other researchers have looked at the location of the void and proposed fascinating theories. If the Grand Gallery was the resonator hall, perhaps the Big Void was the capacitor bank. Remember, the pyramid generates energy, but it needs to store it or regulate it. A massive chamber located centrally, protected by millions of tons of stone, would be the perfect place to house the batteries, the condensers, or the control circuitry of the machine. Or perhaps it was a second resonator. Some acoustic analyses suggest that the Grand Gallery focuses sound, but maybe it needed a partner. A parallel chamber resonating at a different frequency, creating an interference pattern that focused the energy even more tightly into the king's chamber. There is another possibility. The void could be the engine room proper. The king's chamber is the transducer, granite. The queen's chamber is the chemical reactor. The Grand Gallery is the acoustic transfer. But where was the equipment? Where were the tools? Where did the operator stand? Maybe the king's chamber was too dangerous for humans, filled with hydrogen and high voltage. Maybe the Big Void was the control room, separated from the lethal radiation but connected to the system. The Scan Pyramids team also found a smaller void, a corridor, located right behind the chevron blocks of the original entrance. This corridor goes horizontally into the pyramid. Is it a maintenance tunnel? A wire chase? The existence of the Big Void proves one thing conclusively: The Great Pyramid is not a simple solid mass. It is a complex, multi-layered structure with internal spaces we still do not understand. And the fact that it has remained hidden suggests that whatever is inside was never meant to be seen. It wasn't a tomb with a door. It was a sealed component of a system. Imagine if we could drill a tiny hole and send a camera into the big void. What would we find? Would we find the dust of a pharaoh? Or would we find the corroded remains of metal brackets? Would we find the shards of glass vessels? Would we find the Helmholtz resonators that were blown out of the Grand Gallery, stored there for repair? The authorities have, so far, refused permission to drill. They say it is to protect the monument, and perhaps that is wise. But the mystery pulls at us. We have a massive, unexplained room floating in the dark, right in the heart of the machine. It is the black box of the Giza power plant. Until we look inside, we can only speculate. But the very existence of the void supports the idea that the pyramid had a function that required complex internal architecture, far beyond what is needed for a burial. The muons have shown us the ghost of a chamber. Now we have to ask, is that where the answers are hiding? As we move toward the end of our investigation, we have to step back. If the Egyptians had this technology, electricity, acoustics, chemistry, why don't we see it elsewhere? Why are there no power lines in the hieroglyphs? Why did they go back to oil lamps and chariots? Or did they? In the next section, we will look for the echoes of this technology in other places. We will travel to the Temple of Dendera to see the light bulbs. We will look at the Baghdad Battery. Maybe the technology wasn't lost all at once. Maybe it lingered, misunderstood, and mimicked, becoming the magic of the priests long after the machine stopped humming. One of the most difficult questions to answer in the lost civilization theory is this: if the ancient Egyptians, or a culture before them, had electricity, advanced acoustics, and precision engineering, where did it all go? Why did they go back to lighting oil lamps? Why did they stop cutting granite with laser-like precision and go back to chipping away at soft sandstone? It is a valid question. History, as we understand it, is usually a ladder climbing upward. We invent the wheel, then the cart, then the car. We don't usually invent the Ferrari and then go back to walking. But there is a concept in anthropology called a cargo cult. During World War II, indigenous tribes on isolated Pacific islands saw American airplanes land. They saw soldiers unpacking crates, cargo, filled with food, medicine, and incredible tools. They didn't understand the engineering behind the planes or the radio towers. They just saw that certain rituals, soldiers marching, waving flags, wearing headphones, resulted in the gods sending cargo. When the war ended and the soldiers left, the tribes tried to bring the cargo back. They built airplanes out of straw and bamboo. They built control towers out of wood. They carved wooden headphones and marched in formation. They mimicked the form of the technology, hoping to reproduce the function. But the planes didn't fly. The radios didn't work. They were just empty shells, echoes of a power they didn't understand. The Giza power plant hypothesis suggests that much of what we see in later ancient Egypt, the Egypt of the New Kingdom of Ramses and Tutankhamun, might be a cargo cult. Maybe the Great Pyramid was the original machine built by a civilization at its peak. And maybe after the catastrophe, after the knowledge was lost, the descendants tried to copy it. They built pyramids, but they built them out of rubble and mud brick, and they used them as tombs because they remembered that the Great House was a place of transformation, even if they forgot it was energy transformation. But are there physical echoes of the technology itself? Let's travel south to the Temple of Hathor at Dendra. In a crypt beneath the temple, there is a relief carved into the wall that has baffled researchers for decades. It depicts a human figure holding up a massive, transparent, oblong object. Inside this object, a snake is wavy and floating. The object is plugged into a box or a flower at one end, which is attached to a cable running along the floor. Supporting the object is a jed pillar, a symbol often associated with stability and power. To an Egyptologist, this is a creation myth. The snake is Harsamtis, arising from the lotus flower in the primal waters. But to an electrical engineer, like the Norwegian Walter Garn, this looks exactly like a Crookes tube, an early form of a cathode ray tube or a light bulb. In a Crookes tube, an electrical discharge travels through a vacuum, looking like a wavy snake of light. The cable looks like a power cord. The jed pillar, with its strange stacked vertebrae, looks remarkably like a high-voltage insulator used on power lines today. If you build a model of the Dendra relief using glass, copper, and a vacuum, it actually works. It glows. Is the Dendra relief a blueprint? Or is it a memory? Is it a religious carving based on a story passed down for thousands of years about the days of light, when the priests could hold the sun in their hands? Then there is the Baghdad Battery, found in Iraq, ancient Parthia. Not Egypt, but relevant to the region. It is a simple clay jar, about 5 inches tall. Inside, there is a copper cylinder. Inside the copper cylinder is an iron rod, separated by asphalt, bitumen, acting as a stopper. If you fill this jar with an acidic liquid, like grape juice or vinegar, it produces an electric current, roughly 1.1 volts. This is not a theory. It is a fact. The Baghdad Battery is a galvanic cell. It was found in layers dating to around 250 BC. Mainstream archaeologists say it might have been used for electroplating gold onto silver statues. But even that admission is huge. It means the ancient world knew how to generate and use electricity chemically. If they had batteries in 250 BC, is it so impossible to imagine they had something larger in 2500 BC? There is also the mystery of the Ark of the Covenant. We know it from the Bible and from movies, but the description of the Ark in the book of Exodus is essentially a blueprint for a massive capacitor. It is a wooden box, insulator, lined inside and outside with pure gold, conductor. This layering gold is exactly how you build a capacitor to store static electricity. The cherubim on top, with their wings touching, form the spark gap. The Bible says that anyone who touched the ark carelessly would die. It says the ark glowed. It says it spoke with the voice of God. Was the ark a portable piece of technology? A remnant of the energy source that once powered the Giza complex? Dunn and others point to the Serapeum at Saqqara as another echo. Here, in underground tunnels, we find 24 massive granite boxes, weighing up to 100 tons each. The boxes are cut with the same impossible precision as the king's chamber. The corners are perfect 90-degree angles. The surfaces are mirror smooth, but the hieroglyphs scratched onto the outside are crude, rough, and clearly added much later. It looks like someone found these perfect, technological boxes and decided to scratch their name on them. Inside these boxes, archaeologists found nothing. No mummies of bulls, as was expected. Just emptiness, or in some cases, a layer of bitumen. Were these boxes containment vessels? Spent fuel rod casings? Batteries? The echoes are faint, but they are there. We see a civilization obsessed with light, power, and stability. We see artifacts that look like machines. We see buildings that function like circuits. But we must be careful. It is easy to see what we want to see. A man with a hammer sees a nail. A man with an iPhone sees a touchscreen in a stone tablet. In the next section, we have to take off the engineer's goggles and put on the historian's hat. We have to give the tomb theory its fair day in court. Because for all the anomalies, there is also a mountain of evidence that says the Egyptians were exactly who we think they were. A deeply spiritual people building a stairway to heaven, not a power plant. Let's look at the other side of the coin. Let's look at the arguments of the skeptics. We have spent hours tonight weaving a tapestry of high-tech speculation. We have turned stone into circuitry and empty rooms into chemical reactors. It is a compelling story. It makes the past feel close, immediate, and thrilling. But in the spirit of true inquiry, we must be honest. We cannot ignore the evidence that contradicts the machine hypothesis. And there is a lot of it. Mainstream Egyptology is not a conspiracy to hide the truth. It is a discipline built on 2 centuries of digging, reading, and cataloging. And the story they tell is very different from the one Christopher Dunn tells. The most powerful argument against the Giza power plant is Occam's razor. The simplest explanation is usually the correct one. We know the ancient Egyptians were obsessed with the afterlife. We have thousands of tombs that are definitely tombs. We have the Valley of the Kings. We have mummies. We have the pyramid texts, spells carved into the walls of later pyramids, like the Pyramid of Unas, that explicitly describe the king's soul rising to the stars to join the gods. If every other pyramid in Egypt is a tomb or a cenotaph, a symbolic tomb, why would the Great Pyramid be a power plant? The machine features we identified, the shafts, the granite, the precision, can all be explained through religious symbolism. The shafts point to stars, Orion associated with Osiris, the god of rebirth, and Sirius associated with Isis. To an Egyptologist, these are not microwave guides. They are star shafts for the soul to travel to the netherworld. The fact that they are sealed in the Queen's chamber might simply mean the plan changed during construction, or they were symbolic rather than functional. The granite was used not for piezoelectricity, but because it was the most durable, eternal stone available. It was meant to protect the king's body forever. The precision? The Egyptians were master craftsmen. Just because they used simple tools doesn't mean they couldn't be precise. They had unlimited time and manpower. You can sand granite flat with sand and a stone block if you do it for years. You can align a building to the north using the stars and simple sighting sticks, the Merkit, with incredible accuracy. And then there is the Diary of Mirror. In 2013, archaeologists working at an ancient harbor on the Red Sea, Wadi al-Jarf, discovered a cache of papyri. These were the logbooks of a middle-ranking official named Mirror, who worked during the reign of Khufu, the pharaoh credited with building the Great Pyramid. The papyri document the daily transport of white Tura limestone blocks from the quarries to the Giza Plateau. Mirror describes delivering the stone to the horizon of Khufu, the name of the Great Pyramid, under the authority of the Vizier Ankhaf. This is the smoking gun for the Orthodox timeline. It proves that Khufu built the pyramid. It proves that stone was being moved by boat and manpower, not by levitation or anti-gravity. It grounds the pyramid firmly in the Bronze Age. Skeptics also point out the lack of industrial evidence. If the Queen's chamber was a chemical reactor, where are the pumps? Where are the ceramic pipes? Where are the waste disposal sites for the thousands of gallons of zinc chloride? If the Grand Gallery exploded, why are there no shards of the resonators? If the pyramid generated microwaves, where are the charred remains of the receivers? Dunn argues that the equipment was stripped, but is it likely that every single bolt, wire, and scrap of metal was removed so cleanly that not a trace remains? And what about the soot? While Petrie saw exfoliated rock suggesting heat, chemical analysis of the black residue in the pyramid often reveals it to be bat guano, or soot from the torches of 19th century explorers. The salt on the walls could be natural salinity from the limestone, drawn out by humidity, the sweating of the rock. There is also the cultural context. The Giza power plant theory requires us to believe in a technological civilization that lived alongside or hidden within the Egyptian culture we know, a civilization that left no written record of their machines. The Egyptians wrote down everything. They wrote down how much beer the workers drank. They wrote down the height of the Nile. They wrote down their medical recipes. Why did they never write down, "Today we turned on the power plant"? The skeptics argue that we are projecting our own technological bias onto the past. We live in an age of machines, so we see a machine. The ancients lived in an age of gods, so they built a house for a god. Perhaps the acoustic resonance was not for electricity, but for chanting. Imagine 100 priests in the king's chamber, intoning a low OM. The room would amplify their voices, creating a supernatural experience. It would feel like magic. It would confirm the Pharaoh's power. Isn't that a function? 2. A psychological and spiritual machine. The debate is fierce. On one side, the hard data of engineering, the erosion, the precision, the physics. On the other, the hard data of archaeology, the papyri, the tombs, the cultural consistency. Can both be true? Could Khufu have repurposed an older structure? Could the tomb be a later casing over a much older machine? Or is the machine entirely a figment of our modern imagination? In our final section, we will stand back and look at the pyramid one last time. We will listen to the eternal hum that still seems to emanate from the plateau, whether it is physical or metaphorical. And we will try to find a conclusion that respects both the mystery and the science. The sun is setting over Giza. The tourists are leaving. The stones are cooling. But the question remains. Join me for the final chapter. We have walked a long road tonight. We began in the wet, dark bedrock beneath the Giza Plateau, listening to the pulse of the aquifer. We climbed through the limestone core, tracing the veins of a machine that might have once hummed with the power of the earth itself. We stood in the Queen's chamber, imagining the hiss of hydrogen gas. We ascended the Grand Gallery, feeling the phantom vibration of resonators that are no longer there. And we touched the cold, cracked granite of the King's chamber, wondering if it once glowed with the violet light of a star song. We have looked at the evidence of catastrophe, the scorched walls, the melted rocks, the snapped beams. We have looked at the echoes of technology in the battery jars of Baghdad and the reliefs of Dendra. And we have listened to the skeptics who remind us that sometimes a stone is just a stone, and a tomb is just a resting place for a king who wanted to be a god. Where does that leave us? Is the Great Pyramid a tomb? Is it a power plant? Is it a time capsule? Perhaps the answer is not in choosing one or the other, but in accepting that the past is a country whose borders have been erased by time. If the Giza power plant hypothesis is true, it changes everything we think we know about human history. It suggests that we are not the first to harness the fundamental forces of nature. It suggests that electricity is not a modern invention, but a rediscovery. It implies that there was a time when humanity or a civilization that walked this earth before us understood the planet not as a resource to be burned, but as a partner to be danced with. Think about the elegance of the machine we described tonight. It didn't burn coal. It didn't split atoms in a way that left toxic waste for a million years. It didn't dam rivers and kill ecosystems. It used the natural movement of the earth. It used the vibration of the ground, the flow of water, the resonance of stone. It was a technology of harmony. It was clean, wireless, and seemingly limitless. If such a thing existed, its loss is a tragedy beyond measure. It means we have spent the last 4,500 years stumbling in the dark, reinventing the wheel while the ruins of a better way stood silently watching us. But even if the hypothesis is wrong, even if Christopher Dunn is chasing a mirage, and the pyramid was simply the greatest tomb ever built, the wonder remains. Because if it is a tomb built with the precision of an optical lens. It is a tomb aligned to the cosmos with an accuracy we can barely match. It is a tomb that required the movement of millions of tons of stone using methods we still cannot fully replicate. Whether it was built by engineers to generate power or by priests to generate immortality, the Great Pyramid stands as a testament to what humanity is capable of when it focuses its will. There is a concept we touched upon earlier: entropy. Site_start, the Great Eraser Site, 394, 840. Time hates complexity. It grinds mountains into sand. It rusts iron. It rots wood. It creates silence where there was once noise. The fact that the Great Pyramid is still here at all is a victory against entropy. It is the only wonder of the ancient world that survived. The Hanging Gardens are gone. The Colossus of Rhodes is gone. The Lighthouse of Alexandria is gone. But the pyramid remains. It has been stripped of its casing stones. It has been robbed of its capstone. It has been tunneled into, blasted with dynamite, and subjected to the acid rain of modern pollution. And yet, its geometry holds. Its alignment holds. Maybe that was the point all along. If you were an ancient engineer, and you knew that a catastrophe was coming, a flood, a fire, a dark age, and you wanted to leave a message for the future, how would you write it? You wouldn't write it on paper. Paper burns. You wouldn't write it on a hard drive. Digital data fades. You wouldn't even write it in a language because languages die and are forgotten. You would write it in mathematics. You would write it in stone. You would build a mountain that encodes the size of the earth, the speed of light, and the value of pi into its very foundations. You would build it so big that it could not be buried, and so precise that it could not be mistaken for a natural hill. You would build the Great Pyramid. And you would wait. You would wait for a future civilization to rise up, to reinvent physics, to discover electricity, and to finally look at your monument and say, "We understand." Maybe we are that civilization. Maybe we are just now learning to read the message. When you lay your head down tonight, I want you to listen to the hum of your own world. The refrigerator in the kitchen, the traffic outside, the distant sound of a plane. We live in a noisy, electric age. But close your eyes and imagine the silence of the desert. Imagine the wind blowing through the empty slots of the Grand Gallery. Imagine the dark, cold granite of the King's Chamber. Is it truly silent? Or is it just waiting for the right key to turn it on again? The earth is a restless recorder. Site_start. It remembers everything. even if we have forgotten Site 59, 125. It remembers the fires, the floods, and the civilizations that rose and fell like tides. The Great Pyramid is part of that memory. Site_start. It is a shadow of a technology we can almost touch, but not quite grasp. Site 639. It is a mystery that invites us to keep asking, keep measuring, and keep dreaming. Thank you for walking through the stone with me tonight. Thank you for opening your mind to the possibility that the history we know is just a fragment of the history that was. If you enjoyed this journey into the mysteries beneath the earth, and if you want to be part of our next expedition into the unknown, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It tells the algorithm that you are curious, and it helps us keep the lights on, even without a Giza power plant. Sleep well, and remember, the ground beneath your feet is never truly silent. It is always humming with the stories of those who came before. Good night.